Okay, next is at the group Protist, and we have talked about the heterotrophic protists that are kind of animal-like in the fact that they have to ingest their own food. We have actually two more groups, the plant-like protists, or those that are photosynthetic, and then a small group that are uh, fungi-like, and they actually at one time were thought to be fungi. They resemble fungi in a number of their appearances that they take, but they have been placed in a different group, one that is in a similar group to the amoebas, but it is a group, kind of a distant group of those called the slime molds. And a slime mold, they kind of resemble, in part of their life cycle, they resemble amoebas, which are more in the protozoan group, the animal type protist. But the slime molds can actually be divided into two groups. Those that are cellular in form are those that are plasmodial, and they take on a mass form. So this first one we're going to look at right here is the plasmodial slime mold. Now these slime molds, like I mentioned, have some similarities to fungi, to one particular group of fungi, the molds. And again, they were once thought to be in that group and were placed in that, but they're quite different from that. They do not have the type of cellular structure that fungi have, so they're not fungi. So they have been placed in this group, the Protist. But in the plasmodial slime mold, you have this mass that groups together these cells. So this is looking at a life cycle. Oh, and they have a lot of kind of variation in color and form. This is one right here in the image up here in the top right corner. They'll often grow on dead and decaying material. You can see these very commonly in the woods and detritus of leaves and limbs and things like that they'll be growing on. But that yellowy fungus looking, it looks kind of like a fungus and where it's how it grows, but it's actually not a fungus. Anyway, the cells, they have a part of their life cycle, they're individual cells, and that's where they have been grouped in with these amoeboid groups, with the amoebas. But the individual cells will either have flagella, or there'll be the flagella, or there'll be these amoeboid cells. And these will be haploid. These cells develop from spores, and when they are produced, they're haploid. And so when they fertilize, they will fuse together to form a zygote. And so this would be a diploid cell. And then as it matures, it grows into, starts dividing from one cell into two, two into four, and so forth. And it'll develop into this mass of these cells. And this mature mass is called the plasmodium. So it'll grow like this, and once it grows into a large mass, it can then grow these young structures that will, through meiosis, produce spores. And this insert right here shows you some microscopic views of these sporangium, these structures that produce spores. And those spores are then released, and then they can germinate and produce some more of those haploid cells. That's the life cycle of a plasmodium slime mold. There is another type of slime mold called a cellular slime mold, and they can form multicellular aggregates similar to the plasmodium. And let's see, let's look at one of those. Okay, here's a life cycle of a cellular slime mold. Again, very similar to the plasmodium slime mold, but here these can live as single-celled structures, and so again they have a single-cell portion of their life cycle that's haploid. And they form a mass, again, similar to the plasmodium, but in this mass, it's an aggregated group of cells that are individual. So these cells are divided by membranes that separate the nuclei. In the plasmodium slime mold, it's a mass of cells. It's a mass of nuclei, multiple nuclei that are in the aggregate there, but they are not separated by individual cells. So that's the difference. They still produce these fruiting bodies that are going to release spores, and but the mass takes on this slug-like structure, this aggregated mass with multiple nuclei. And so those are the two types of slime molds. And again, we can kind of consider those to be similar to fungi in appearance and structure, but they are protist. And so there we have some similarities. And our last group that we're going to look at is another group of protists that are the photosynthetic protists, and these are usually referred to as the algae. And so in this we have a number of different groups that fall into this category of our single-celled photosynthetic organisms of the protists. And we also have a group in here that are multicellular. Okay, so in this group we have a number of different categories, but and we're going to look at the concentrate on a few of the major groups of these algae, and sometimes these are photosynthetic. They are Many of them are floating photosynthetic organisms called phytoplankton. And so these are floating plants. They're found in marine freshwater systems. And, um, and generally, we can kind of divide these into three different groups. The first is a group that contain flagella. We talked about those in some of the animal type protists that have flagella. This group called the dinoflagellates. These are photosynthetic protists. They're aquatic, and they're very abundant you find them both in marine and freshwater. This right here is an example of one of a dinoflagellate. And one unique phenomenon they're responsible for is something called a red tide. When these become very numerous through a reproductive bloom, high reproduction in this organism, they can become very numerous in the waters, and they have a red pigment in them, and they can actually kind of dye the waters red in the ocean. And when they do that, they can cause damage to the organisms that live in that area. One, they rob the area of oxygen, but another is they release some toxins that can actually harm or even kill fish and other organisms that live in that area. Oftentimes, they'll have warning signs for people that wanting to swim in that. The levels of these can be high, and they can actually be toxic to humans as well. So that's one group. Another group that we mentioned, and again, very important in marine environments, are the diatoms. Diatoms, there's an example of a diatom. They have very symmetrical type shapes of their cells because in their cell wall they have silica, which is a glass-like substance. And so that's a key characteristic of these, and they're very numerous in the ocean. They're a very important base of the food chain in the ocean. And so those are called diatoms. And the last group we mentioned are the green algae. Green algae are those that have a green pigment in them, and there's a number of different types of this. They include single cell, multicellular, and a unique group that are colonial. Colonial means there's a bunch of individual cells that kind of live together in a colony. And one of those is Volvox. This shows Volvox right here. This is a colony of the cells. Each one of these individual circular structures here is a colony of individual cells, and those are called, that type of colonial green algae is called Volvox. We have some other types of cells in this group, other types of algae in this group that are multicellular. And some of these multicellular algae are large algae that we would find in the oceans. A lot of our algae that we call seaweeds. A common name, seaweeds, is given to these groups. But they are actually not plants. They are protists. Plants have to have some unique characteristics of leaves, roots, and stems. And these organisms do not have those general characteristics. They have what are called blades, stipes, and holdfast, which are quite different from leaves, stems, and roots. If you look at the cellular structure, they do not have anything similar to the cellular makeup that leaves, stems, and roots do. So they are not considered plants. At one time they were, but they are multicellular protists is what they're grouped into now. And there's three different types. They're basically based on their pigment color. So you have brown algae like this one, you have red algae, and you have green algae that are in this multicellular form. The red algae are called rhodophyta for the red pigment. Here's an example of that. So red pigment, you see that there. The brown algae that we just looked at are called phaeophyta, and then the green algae are called, here's a green algae, multicellular green algae called ulva or sea lettuce, and there's another one there. And these are called chlorophyta. And so these are multicellular protists. Okay, that ends our lecture, our podcast for the lecture on Protist, and that actually ends our lecture on the microorganisms. So we've talked about bacteria, we've talked about our animal type heterotrophic protists, and we've talked about our plant-like and the group of slime molds as well. So in our discussion here in this unit about biodiversity, we still have plants and animals to go through, very diverse groups. So our next few podcasts, we'll be looking at those.